An island of signals hums just off the shore, where prophets wear keycards and pray to the light. Its breakers are headlines that ask us for more. The future leaks static and refuses the night. Barcodes like rosaries click on the bone. An angel of metrics decides what we heed. The courts mint their verdicts in sponsored stone, and truth comes pre-tagged with a price and a feed. Governance performs on a hungry stage. The actors wear masks that mirror our eyes. Each scandal resets the calendar's age, while lies buy applause in respectable disguise. Once visions were carved out of salt and brine, now beasts rise in pop-ups and battlefield scrolls. We call it New Patmos, a city of brine, where exiles refresh, confess, and sell back their souls. He walks where the seams of the districts refuse to meet, a ledgerless birth with no oath to a law. His gaze is a lantern that hunts in the gutted street. The record says nothing. The night shows its jaw. Compassion, a tremor that rose when the nameless wept. He felt every rumor of hurt in the worker's bone. It cut like a quiet command that must be kept, a love that refused to be managed by throne or phone. He bargains with mirrors that never let sorrow pass. The meek in the doorway keep waiting to name the flame. He learns that a kiss can be riot against the glass, that blessing and table flip answer the same old claim. So hush for a heartbeat, the stillness becomes demand. The market goes mute as the alley remembers breath. The mirror is waiting, it reaches to take his hand, where dignity rises before every rule and death. He walked through the alleys where silence was sold as peace, each shadow concealing a story the crowd ignored. His gaze was a hunger that never could find release, a question unanswered, a wound he could not afford. The beggar's cracked bowl seemed to echo his inner lack, a mirror of hollows no priest or physician filled. He lingered to watch as the bowl caught the city's track, the offerings absent, the mercy of hearts unskilled. A shrine held an icon obscured by a gauzy veil, its face half concealed, yet it burned with a hidden fire. The faithful passed quickly, too fearful to lift the grail. But Kairos felt drawn by a force both austere and dire. A coin slipped and rolled through the dust of the market floor, its clatter a summons that halted his moving breath. It stopped at his heel, as if fate had prepared the score, a token of choice that could bind him to life or death. Then broke a child's cry, unfiltered and sharp as need. The market unraveled, its rhythm in glass was torn. A whisper, his name, seemed to rise through the noise and bleed as though the world called him to witness its shame, reborn. And here was the mirror. Compassion became his frame. The sight of the broken was fire that seized his chest. To witness was vow. He could never remain the same, for mercy demanded a strength he could not arrest. He spoke, and the market grew restless beneath his tone. The priests grew defensive. The soldiers betrayed their fear. His challenge cut deeper than iron or sharpened stone, a fracture of silence that all who had ears could hear. The current within him grew steady, a living thread. It pulled him through chaos towards something he could not name. He felt in his marrow the pulse of the torn and dead, a summons that whispered the world would not stay the same. Yet stillness returned like a shroud when the moment passed. The crowd went to trading, the priests to their rites again. The ache of compassion grew heavy, the silence vast. Its meaning now faltered, its brilliance began to wane. And Kairos grew weary, to see but to change no thing, the sight of the wound without power to set it right. Compassion turned restless, a tether without a wing, a hunger that deepened the shadow before the light. A shadow of ledgers descended upon his name. The taxman appeared with a register cold and vast, each number a binding, each tally a binding claim, a summons that fastened the living into the past. Your worth is the weight of the coin you can bring to me, your birth but a record, a figure upon my page. The empire has measured the cost of your liberty. Your silence is tribute. Your speech is a debtor's wage. He stared at the columns, the ink like a tightening chain, each digit a shackle that fastened the breath to ground. Yet deeper he felt something older within remain, a lineage whisper that could not by sums be bound. A crumpled certificate slept in his pocket seam. Its seal was no empires, no courts, no priest's decree. It carried a mark from the marrow of blood and dream, an origin older than any who claimed the fee. The taxman demanded compliance. The forms were clear, the debt of the living inscribed by the nation's hand. But Kairos remembered a birthright beyond their sphere, a freedom unmeasured, untallied by rule or land. He tore through the notice. Its edges became the proof, a shredded refusal that scattered into the air. Defiance was chosen, a vow to expose the roof, the ceiling of empire that masks what it cannot bear. The guards saw a danger, the priests saw a blasphemy. The markets grew quiet, the soldiers prepared their gaze. But Kairos stood steady. No empire could number he, for worth was not counted in ledgers or laws or praise. Yet shadows grew longer. The notice would not stay gone. Its fragments like whispers returned in his restless dreams. Each bank slip a judgment, each camera a watchful dawn, each ping of his phone a demand from intrusive schemes. He read every gesture as test of his fragile claim. Projection made tyrants of neighbors and friends alike. The loop tightened inward. His world was a narrowed frame, each meeting a ledger, each kindness a hidden strike. Alone with his fragments, he circled the same refrain, sovereignty turning to suspicion of every breath. Yet cracks in the pattern revealed he could not remain. The trial awaited, the fire that tests with death. A trailhead was marked with a stone by the broken road, a sign without wording yet heavy with untold weight. It beckoned him outward from markets where ledgers glowed, towards silence and ash where the world would decide his fate. The calling was quiet, a pressure against his chest. No priest gave instruction, no soldier supplied command. It whispered, "Step out from the roles that you once possessed. The path of the seeker is written in shifting sand." He carried a journal, but fire consumed its skin, its pages collapsing like wings in the sudden flame. The stories he clung to, the names he had trusted in, were burned into embers that carried no claim or name. The headset that once gave instruction dissolved in sparks. The voices of teachers, of leaders, were drowned in noise. The silence that followed was heavier than the dark, for Kairos stood naked without their familiar voice. The trial grew brutal. The air itself seared his breath. The dust turned to cinders that cut through his fragile skin. Each step was surrender, a wager with smoke and death, a stripping away till no mask could remain within. The marrow was hollowed. The fear became something more, a trembling that opened his chest to the world's own flame. He felt in his burning the pulse of a deeper core, a rhythm that told him he'd never be quite the same. And then came the breaking. No self to defend or prove, no empire to serve, no authority left to trust. The current engulfed him. It tore, but it also moved, revealing his body as bridge between fire and dust. The smoke carried visions of rivers that crossed the years, of faces ancestral that breathed through his open frame. He saw he was woven of sorrows and secret tears, yet also of patterns that whispered his hidden name. But soon came the fracture, the compass no longer true. Its needle was shattered, the signals became a snare. The radio static made nonsense of what he knew. The water was empty, the trial turned thin with air. Each model he fashioned collapsed in the ash again, each answer dissolved into questions that would not stay. Disillusionment deepened, a wound without voice or pen, till symbols alone seemed the path to another way. A mug carved of clay held a bitter and fragrant brew, and its warmth was an echo of soil and ancestral rain. He lifted it slowly. The seed was a door made new, inviting the marrow to listen, to breathe, to gain. The taste was a memory older than any king, a sweetness that lingered, but carried the weight of ground. The seed spoke of cycles, of winter's returning spring, of roots interwoven with all who had once been bound. A recipe card lay beside on the altar floor. Its ink was a lineage, handed through hands and years. A pattern repeated, yet never the same before, refined by devotion, by patience, by joy and tears. He measured and stirred with a reverence in his hand. Each gesture an offering returned to the world that fed. The act was a circle, a vow he could understand, that nothing was taken unless something else was shed. The window was open, and air from the dusk poured in. It mingled with incense, with music of leaves and birds. The walls seemed to soften. The line between out and in dissolved into silence that spoke without need for words. The current grew gentle, a river that kissed his skin. The world was no longer a backdrop, but part of breath. He felt his own body extend where the trees begin, a pulse unafraid of the border of life and death. Transformed by the seed, he was neither a part nor whole, but woven, a fabric of heartbeat and earth and flame. The cosmos was tactile, imprinted within his soul, a bond unrecorded by empire, by law or name. Yet soon came the spiral. The seed became constant sign, each number repeated, each pattern a secret code. He covered his walls with the notes of a restless mind. The world was a cipher, a puzzle that never slowed. The texts went unanswered, the people became a blur, each gesture suspected of hiding a cosmic clue. The symbols were many, yet meaning could not occur. The map was consuming the land it was meant to view. At last he grew weary, the patterns began to fray, each omen grew empty, each cycle dissolved to dust. He knew he must gather, relayer and ground his way. The vault of the silent awaited his deeper trust. A lab door was sealed with a lock that the world forgot, its hinges unbent by the rust of 1,000 days. Inside was a silence unbroken by plague or rot, a sanctuary sterile, immune to the city's frays. Preserved in its chambers, the air had a waiting weight, a stillness that whispered of purpose beneath the calm. The chaos outside could not shatter this guarded state. Yet safety was heavy, a chain dressed in gilded balm. The hush was not freedom, but pressure deferred in time. The mercy of absence was sharp as a surgeon's blade. Containment concealed in its sterile, exacting rhyme a future unfinished, a debt that had not been paid. Upon a glass table, a vial of liquid lay, its clarity fragile yet dense with a secret code. Dormant it shimmered as though it could wake one day, a seed of contagion or gift that the earth bestowed. He studied its stillness, preserved yet it seemed to breathe, as if an intention had guided the sealed design. Survival, he realized, was not to be spared with ease, but chosen for burden, inscribed with another sign. An image then bloomed on a screen in the chamber's core, an MRI glowing with patterns beneath his skin. It rendered his marrow as maps he had not seen before, designs in his body that whispered of fate within. And then came the spike, an awakening raw and wild, a lattice of fire that spread through his veins with heat. No longer preserved, he was vessel and seed and child, a carrier chosen, his heartbeat a code's repeat. But depth became drowning. The board on the wall was filled with charts, with timelines, with meanings that spun too wide. Each pattern was heavy, each symbol with tension killed. The labyrinth offered no gate and no hand to guide. His thoughts became drafts never sent, in a stuttering loop. Each message began but dissolved in its endless form. The cursor kept blinking, an eye that would never droop, a witness to stasis that smothered both fire and storm. At last he grew still, overwhelmed by the weight of signs, preservation twisted to chains that could not release. He knew he must filter, give shape to the vault's designs, to turn depth to motion, to carve from the weight some peace. An encrypted drive hummed with a weight he could feel but not read. Its silence was louder than any decree of law. He knew that within it lay records of every seed intention inscribed in the codes that the world still saw. For every decision, a ripple would twist and bend a whisper of causes unseen in their starting place. What one hand had chosen, another would meet as end, and freedom was braided with consequence none erase. A spool of bright cable lay tangled beneath his feet. Its threads were invisible rivers of voice and sound. Through glass and through fiber, the pulses of strangers meet, entangled together in networks that cross the ground. He touched it and felt how the choices of those unseen were binding his marrow, were shaping his breath and name. Each knot was a witness to power's recursive sheen. Each loop was resistance that mirrored control with blame. The monitors glowed with 1,000 unfolding screens, a war and a famine, a treaty, a child at play. The world was simultaneous, braided in hidden means, a present constructed of causes from far away. The veil then was lifted, the threads he could barely sense now shone like a lattice, alive with a constant fire. The map of entanglement burned in its vast suspense, and Kairos stood trembling before what the webs required. For nothing was random collapse, was a patent call the Empire's undoing revealed as a karmic tide. The fall of the systems was not just decay at all, but summons to join in a birth that the dark supplied. Yet soon the servers began to overload their frame, the signals were many too tangled to hold as one. Each chart was a fracture, each flowchart forgot its aim. The system collapsed in the weight of what it had done. The headphones grew static, the noise overran the song, the signals grew louder, but meaning was drowned in sound. Perception was blinded, each pattern was called out wrong, and sense turned to splinters that shattered across the ground. He knelt in the din, overwhelmed by the ceaseless streams. The threads were too many, the weight he could not contain. He knew he must shift from the fracture of broken schemes to harmony's rhythm where presence could still remain. The capital smoldered, its marble still held the frame, but columns were hollow, their voices had long since fled. The laws still were written, but no one believed the claim. A ghost of authority marched where the body bled. The Senate debated, but words had become a show. Each promise an echo repeated for old applause. The rot of the structure was something all minds could know. A building intact but unbound by its founding laws. The air smelled of ashes, the chambers of smoke and fear. The flag still was flying, though tattered by wind and flame. Decay had not vanished, it lingered but made it clear. Survival of forms can conceal their unraveled name. Then, screens lit around him, a dashboard of feeds and lies. The numbers were shifting with every manipulated trend. The algorithms sharpened their teeth with each new disguise, and chaos grew louder, for profit was still the end. 1,000 new prophets were paid for their sharpened words. They fractured consensus and weaponized every grief. The people were swayed by the stories that swarmed like birds. Their anger became the new empire of disbelief. Yet out in the rubble, a vacant lot bloomed with green. A garden was tended by hands that refused despair. The soil cracked open, and seedlings restored the scene. A whisper of rebirth arose in the ashen air. He bent to the garden and felt in its pulse a vow. The myths of renewal were sprouting where old ones died. The seeds of tomorrow were rooted already now, though carrying endings within them they could not hide. But then came the blackout. The skyline went dark at once, the towers that glittered collapsed in a single breath. No framework remained for the exile. The child, the dunce, the city was silent, a void filled with hints of death. The ticker kept scrolling, though nonsense replaced the fact. Contradiction twisted its letters in fevered streams. The mirror was shattered. His purpose could not stay intact. His self was in fragments, dispersed through 1,000 dreams. Yet standing amid it, he steadied his breath and frame. The garden still whispered, the ashes still held their heat. He knew he must act, though no system remained the same. Convergence would anchor the chaos beneath his feet. The Jumbotron flickered with faces that changed by hour, a scandal at sunrise, replaced by a feud by noon. The crowd never rested, enthralled by the shifting power. Each fragment performed like a song in a fleeting tune. The stage was unending, its curtains refused to close. The actors rehearsed only outrage and bitter cries. Each gesture was crafted to sharpen the tribal rouse. No verdict was given, but ratings began to rise. The feed was an avalanche surging through every screen. A hashtag erupted. It buried the day in flame. Its numbers decided what billions would call unseen, and truth was no measure, for virality wrote the frame. The swarm was a weapon, a storm in the coded sky, each echo repeating until it became a creed. The actors grew stronger the louder the people's sigh. Their profit was measured in fury, not in need. The podium waited, though nothing was left to say. Its wood was a relic, a stage for the actors' spin. Debates became rituals, scripted in tired display, where theater replaced what the law had once held within. The guardrails had vanished, the chambers dissolved in show. Decisions were props in a drama without a close. The empire kept burning, yet crowds only sought the glow, a governance hollow, a stage where no ruler knows. Yet Kairos kept sifting, Refusing the endless scroll, he filtered the signals, deciding what he would see. He stood as performer, but never surrendered role, a mirror that mocked yet preserved his own agency. But soon he grew weary, his mind like a processor fried. The spectacle surged until every defense was gone. Each part of his being was forced into overdrive. The act kept on playing, but he was no longer strong. The screens became mosaics, 1,000 realities split. His self was fragmented, too many to reconcile. The bottle lay empty, his body could not commit, and burnout consumed him beneath the relentless style. Yet still in the silence between the collapsing streams, he felt the necessity stirring beneath the noise. He knew he must shape from the fragments of broken dreams a mode of recombining, a freedom of failing choice. A partition of glass stood opaque at the temple's heart. Its frosted translucence suggested but never showed. The people knelt silent, convinced of the hidden part, while I kept watching the shadowed and veiled abode. A scanner was mounted, demanding its badge to beep. No entry permitted without the ordained consent. Authority's image was guarded with locks so deep, the gateway itself was the symbol of power spent. A manual thick with decrees had been placed in stone, its rituals binding the faithful in scripted ways. But meaning was hollow. The words were a weary drone rehearsed by the leaders to sanctify empty days. The incense was rising, the chants filled the vaulted air, each syllable masking a vacuum no one would name. The altar was bright, yet behind it the void lay bare, a rule without substance, a symbol that cloaked its shame. But pressure was building, the weight of the centuries strained, the glass showed its fracture, the scanner began to fail. The manual shredded, its pages by fire were drained, the system collapsed as the veil itself tore and fell. The chamber was naked. No God in the throne was found, no pillar unbroken, no certainty left to claim. Yet freedom was present, a silence became profound, revealing the burden of meaning without a name. I saw in the ruin not ending but something more, the call to embody what once had been only sought. The temple was shattered, yet now was an open door, an initiation where power could not be bought. Yet fragments remained, like circuits that failed to link. Each tool was still useful, but none could combine the whole. The schematics were dated, their maps could no longer think. The broadcast was static that fractured my striving soul. Each framework I carried now pulled in a different way. The insight was vast, but coherence had not arrived. My agency splintered, dispersed in the ash and clay, 1,000 small fragments where once a clear self had thrived. And so in the rubble, I gathered, but could not bind. The veil had been torn, but the story refused its thread. I knew I must reach for a pattern beneath the mind, a myth that could rebind the living among the dead. The city went dark as the black moon eclipsed the sky. A silence descended where neon once cut the air. The skyline was hollow, its rhythm had gone awry, and people looked upward, uncertain of what was there. The air felt electric, a pause in the turning gears, an omen unbidden that ruptured the day's disguise. It carried the weight of forgotten ancestral fears, a myth in the heavens, a threshold before their eyes. The screens lit in panic, the tickers announced the void. 1,000 half-truths were repeated with urgent cries. The anchors grew frantic. Their stories could not avoid the archetypal pulse that no algorithm denies. Yet there was a doorway, unlocked in the city's heart, a threshold that whispered of something concealed too long. It beckoned through shadow, a chamber where selves depart, where repressed identities gathered to make me strong. I entered the darkness and faces began to rise, the voices of exile, the wounds I had learned to hide. They asked to be named, to be seen with unflinching eyes. The self I'd abandoned returned to my changing side, and something grew whole in the merging of loss and flame. The dual divisions of inner and outer blurred. The shadow was mine, and I claimed it without my shame. The broken was woven. The silence became a word. Integration surged like a current through skin and bone. The exile was anchor, the castaway was the key. The night was a mirror, yet never was I alone. The black moon revealed me the bridge I was meant to be. But soon came the danger. The omen became a snare, its symbols repeating until they consumed my frame. The broadcast kept looping, Possession was in the air, and myths turned to masters that scripted my voice and name. The mirror was cracking, reflection could not stay true, my agency faltered, the crossroads became a maze. Each pathway was frozen, each action dissolved from view, the archetypes threatened to bind me in endless plays. Yet still I resisted, though presence was frayed and thin. I knew the abyss was the final unyielding test. The void would demand I confront what had lived within, and only through depth could the fragments be knit to rest. The exchange was a furnace, its screens all aflame with loss, the markets convulsed in a flood that erased the ground. Each fortune collapsed like a statue of brittle gloss, and time was a ticker that swallowed without a sound. The numbers went screaming, a language of blood in code, each red line a fracture that tore through the world's facade. Improbable swings turned the system to overload. The ledgers of empire were burned by the dice of God. The brokers were frantic. Their shouting became a hymn, each gesture a gamble, each gamble a prayer of chance. The order was broken. The ground underneath grew dim, yet through it I kept moving, compelled to dance. I laughed at the chaos, not cruelly but just to live, each error a pathway, each stumble a crooked win. The rules of the market had nothing left now to give, but mischief made loopholes where order refused to spin. A shred of a notice blew past like a taunting jest, a contract unmoored from the gravity once it claimed. I caught it and saw that to trick was to pass the test, to bend what was broken, to play in a game unframed. Yet soon came the breaking. Myself felt it split apart, no longer a someone but scattered across the floor. Identity shattered, the voice of my beating heart was drowned by the chaos that mocked what it meant before. My agency faltered. Was choice even mine to make? Each action was swallowed, pre-written by loss and chance. The question arose in the wreckage of every stake. Is freedom a fiction or only the void's romance? The screens all went black, then erupted in gold and flame, a shimmer improbable, mocking the crash's law. The heart of the market appeared without form or name, absurd yet magnetic, demanding I stand in awe. It whispered, "Take hold, you can master the ruined floor." The traders looked upward as silence replaced the storm. The seat stood before me, the axis of rules and war, a throne of control where a new world could take its form. I stood at the altar of ruin, the throne left bare, the brokers still waiting, the silence a held-in hail. I turned from the promise of power enthroned there and let the exchange fall, its dominion beyond the pale. The tickers went dark, the ledgers dissolved like rain, the scaffolds collapsed, their numbers returned to clay. But out from the hollow arose a forgotten vein. The heart was no master, but force that would not obey. It beat like a drum in the marrow beneath the ground, a pulse of upheaval that carried the buried seed. The world's deep rhythm returned where the loss was found, an origin older than empire, decree, or creed. The heart spoke in silence, yet thundered through every bone, its current unmeasured, untamed by the priest or throne. Not conquest, but presence, no yoke, no claim, no chain, a power remembered, the wild of the earth regained. Through me it surged, unmaking what bound the flesh, a fire that cleansed but a wind that began to weave. Where towers had fallen, the soil turned black and fresh, and ash fed the roots of 1,000 unbroken leaves. Compassion endured, but now carried a heavier weight, not softness alone, but a tensile, unyielding law. It lifted the broken, yet forged them to recreate, a justice beyond what the markets had ever saw. The seed from the vault burst open and split the stone. Its roots became rivers, entangling breath and flame. Collapse was a summons, but birth was its truest tone, a threshold where memory and promise became the same. The garden had widened, its tenders became the tide. The exiles returned with their names, once struck away. The shadow I carried now walked steady at my side, no longer denied. Its strength shaped the living day. And mischief endured, yet tempered by chosen aim. Not chaos unbound, but play in the tension's care. I bent probability's lattice without shame to guard the most fragile, the breath within their prayer. No longer a seeker, I carried the spring within, each gesture a shaping of meaning the world could hear. Reality met me not backdrop, but breathing kin, and answered my presence with symmetry, fierce and clear. The self became axis, a gravity strong and still. Around it the probable worlds found their arc and turn. No fragments remained of the shattering trial's will, but wholeness embodied a center the lost could learn. So ended the burning of ledgers and gilded throne. The empire in ruin gave soil for a gentler seed. And I, unmastered yet steady, became the stone, a steward of futures where others could rise and lead.